Welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful night, dear viewer. Tonight, I will be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. Make sure to leave your feedback on the comments so I can make this the best experience for you. And if you have any stories you would like me to tell, you can send them through the link in the description. Let's begin. I recently took a trip to Japan to study abroad for a semester. While there, I made many friends who told me all about the history of this beautiful country, in case I came back to visit. One thing to know about Japan is that its advanced technology and cutesy anime characters almost wholly cover up the horrors lurking in the shadows. Unfortunately, I had a painfully terrifying experience with said horrors, which is the whole point of this post. Anyways, it was a Saturday night, and my friends and I went bar hopping from Kyoto to Osaka, since it's only about a 25-minute train ride. We were all pretty tipsy, fumbling and stumbling around each bar. We'd gotten thrown out of 2 bars by that point, and were about to get thrown out again. My friends were arguing with the security guards and other tipsy people, and the mood was killed. I hadn't sobered up, but was still courteous and apologized profusely, practically dragging my friends out of the bar. After all of that, I called them a taxi and went on my way. I had already spent so much that night, so I decided to take a 20-minute walk back to my dorm. There were still a good amount of people walking the streets, so I felt a little more comfortable, still stumbling around. I decided to take a shortcut through a nearby park. I know what you're all thinking. In horror movies, taking shortcuts almost always ends up with someone dying. However, it was freezing cold outside, and the path was the quickest way to my dorm. I walked through the park with my hands in my pockets, hunched over to protect my face from the cold air. Quick footsteps could be heard from behind me. Turning, I didn't see anyone, so I pressed forward. Immediately after I turned back around, the footsteps continued. It was as if a child was running around the park barefoot. I glanced around the area, but still nothing. I turned back around, and that's when my nightmares became my reality. There, lit up by the dim street poles, was a woman laying flat on her stomach, staring at me. From what I could see, the woman's hair was unkempt and all over the place. I squinted before shouting hello. The woman had no reaction, so I assumed she couldn't understand my drunken words. I tried my best to sound sober and repeated myself. Hello, why are you on the floor? I took a step toward the woman, thinking she needed help. The woman propped herself on her hands, revealing the non-existent lower half of her body. I slowly backed away, to which she moved closer. Something on the ground sparkled next to the woman in the moonlight. I could barely make it out, but it looked like a scythe of some sort. The woman let out a husky sigh before speaking. Where are my legs? The woman looked around before fixing her gaze back on me. I had no clue what to say to the woman, so I just replied, I don't know. She tilted her head at me and inched closer. Do you need your legs? At that point, I was fully sober. Thoughts ran circles in my head as I contemplated what to say next. I wondered what my friends were doing, if they made it home safely, or if they were having the same encounter as I was. I snapped out of my thoughts when I realized the woman was no longer under the street poles. After some time of looking around for the woman, I felt a slight stinging pain in my thigh. I peered down, and there she was, staring at me. Blood seeped from my leg and dripped on the woman's face. Analyzing the woman, I noticed that she seemed to be a teenager, as she wore a school uniform. In her hand was the scythe from earlier. I put 2 and 2 together and realized that she had just cut me. Her face was riddled with bruises and dirt, and her eyes were big and doll-like. Do you need your legs? Her voice sounded aggravated. What kind of question is that? I cautiously eyed the young woman as a smirk grew across her face. Within seconds, she raised her scythe in the air and slashed my leg. I immediately started sprinting for my life. as loud pattering sounds grew closer and closer to me. Exiting the park, I turned a sharp corner, hoping to distance myself from the girl. The little path took me back to the main streets of Osaka, but it was completely dead. Nobody was on the roads like previously, and all the surrounding billboards and lights were off. I glanced behind me, only to see the girl using her hands to get closer to me. My leg ached as I grew tired. As I continued, I recognized the area, and soon enough, my campus was in my sight. I managed to throw myself at the door, shattering it into pieces. I screamed, hoping anyone would come out and help. The girl was still a ways away from me, so I took the chance to use the elevator. Pressing the button, I grew more and more impatient. When the door opened, I saw my doormate staring at me in confusion. I thought you were going out. I shoved her and got in the elevator. Pressing all of the buttons, she glanced around until her eyes fell on the girl, who smirked back at her as the doors closed. At this point, the adrenaline had died, and I collapsed into my friend's arms. I sobbed into her shoulder as her grip on me tightened. Who the hell was that? And why was she missing her legs? My breathing hitched as the elevator stopped on the highest floor. We got out and met up with the floor assistant, who guided us to the infirmary to wrap the wounds on my body. I recounted my encounter with the girl to everyone in the room. "You've met the tech," the assistant said in a soft voice. Supposedly, the young schoolgirl had fallen onto a railway line where she was cut in half by an oncoming train. It's told that she wanders around cities in search of her legs and will approach people. She'll ask them questions about her legs, and depending on their answers, she'll either leave them alone or chase them and cut them in half. I learned that I was one of the few people that managed to escape from her. I have since left Japan and returned back to my hometown with my family. My mind to this day can't process what I've experienced. And not many people believed me when I told them. I know what I saw, and I have scars to prove it. You can choose to believe it or not, but I just wanted to put this out there in hopes that someone else has had a similar encounter. During the spooky season, my buddies and I would gather to share our eerie experiences. However, there was one story I seldom touched upon because it didn't fit the mold of the classic scary tales that were usually exchanged over a few beers. I used to work night shifts at a sprawling manufacturing facility. The night crew consisted of a small team, with 5 security personnel and 5 of us handling administrative tasks and packing. As a member of the administrative staff, I would sit with the security team, alternating between patrolling the premises and monitoring the surveillance cameras. Usually, the nights were quiet and uneventful. The building had gained a reputation for being haunted, although I couldn't fathom how. None of us had ever encountered anything supernatural. No one had died or experienced any accidents on the premises. The building hadn't undergone any destruction or reconstruction. It was simply a peaceful and mundane place. Nevertheless, rumors and stories circulated, as they tend to do in large, dark, and creepy spaces. And indeed, the factory had an eerie ambiance. It was surrounded by woods, enclosed by fences, and mostly deserted at night, which made it feel imposing and desolate. Motion-activated lights inside and outside the building added to the creepy atmosphere. Sounds echoed and carried in the empty hallways. Yet, despite the ominous setting, none of us had ever experienced anything strange there, until that night. It was around Halloween, perhaps a week or two before the actual day. I was midway through my shift, approaching my lunch break. The air was chilly as I stepped outside to retrieve my heavier jacket and have a smoke break, standing just outside the back door, closest to the surrounding fence. I realized that the only source of light was a motion. Activated 1. I had to make exaggerated arm movements to keep it on. The area beyond the light's reach was shrouded in darkness, with grass and shadows leading up to the fence. While watching videos on my phone, the light suddenly went out. I sat in the darkness for a moment, sipping my coffee and finishing my cigarette. As I prepared to activate the light by waving my hand, I heard a noise coming from the opposite side of the fence. Initially, I assumed it might be an animal, as we occasionally had wildlife near the premises. But as I stood up, I heard the faint jingling of the fence continuing. Looking up, I couldn't discern much. The light's limited radius barely illuminated the area. For some reason, I instinctively said, "Hello." At that moment, the noise ceased momentarily. I squinted into the darkness, trying to adjust my vision. Suddenly, the light went out. In the darkness, the moonlight offered a faint glow, revealing a slight movement near the fence. It appeared to be a person, opposite me, fidgeting with the links. My immediate thought was that this might be a kid attempting to scare us. Perhaps they planned to break in and conduct a ghost hunt. It wasn't uncommon for high schoolers to venture into the building without realizing it never closed. We usually didn't mind as long as they didn't touch anything and left quickly, so they could regale their friends with their survival stories. However, this situation felt different. A solitary person, which seemed odd. I radioed the security desk using my walkie, talking and said, "Hey, we have a visitor near the north door, behind the fence." Having seen the camera feed monitors, I knew this area was under constant surveillance. They should have been able to clearly see the fence. The voice on the other end of the walkie. Talkie beeped back. "We aren't detecting any movement near the fence." "Is it in the tree line?" "Negative," I responded. "They're fiddling with the fence right in front of me." All of this happened in a matter of seconds. I still held my cigarette butt in one hand, and the remnants of coffee lingered in my mouth. Before they could reply, I heard a loud thrashing sound from the fence, and then I saw a figure sprinting directly towards me. In sheer panic, I let out an embarrassing choking noise, crushing my coffee cup against the doorknob in a frantic attempt to rush inside. The fence was dangerously close, and it wouldn't take more than a few leaps for the figure to reach me. I pushed myself inside with all my strength, holding the doorknob firmly as I struggled to engage the deadbolt. The knob violently jerked against my grip, while on the other side of the door, I could hear and feel something moving. Through the walkie. "Talkie," I urgently radioed. "Get down here now." But footsteps were already approaching. By the time the security team arrived, the doorknob had ceased its movement. The incident was over. Back at the office, the security staff tried to brush off the whole episode, treating it as if I were playing a Halloween prank. I couldn't understand why they weren't taking it seriously until we reviewed the footage. It was just me outside. Nothing else could be seen. I couldn't reconcile the experience I had just gone through with the absence of any evidence on the video. It made me question whether it had all been an elaborate ruse, orchestrated to frighten me. However, their reactions indicated that they genuinely believed I was the one playing tricks. We went back and forth, each side accusing the other of orchestrating the incident, until we watched the footage again. That's when we noticed something peculiar. The door handle continued to move even after I'd removed my hand. Both the indoor and outdoor cameras captured the strange phenomenon. Just before I panicked and turned to run inside, the fence received a slight jolt, as if it had been pushed. There were no openings or cuts in the fence that someone could have used to squeeze through. There were no eerie shadows, unexplained wisps of smoke, or lights, apart from those generated by me. There was only me, standing alone in the night, startled to the core and rushing indoors. I kept replaying the moment when the figure charged at me, trying to determine whether the light had been activated by their movement or mine. But the memory was fleeting, lost in the blur of that intense moment. Yet, no one at the facility wanted to acknowledge what had happened. It was easier to attribute it to the tricks of moonlight, an overactive imagination fueled by too much coffee, or the rustling of branches against the chain links. Everyone claimed they had never experienced anything peculiar there, and they saw it as just another dull building at night. So, I smiled and kept my version of events to myself. However, I couldn't help but wonder if others were also harboring untold stories, waiting for the right moment, lubricated by a few beers, to spill the secrets of the haunted factory. I found myself struggling to sleep due to my poor self-control when it comes to devices and social media usage. This particular night was no exception, as the hours seemed to drag on endlessly. Eventually, I decided to take a break from my computer and headed to the kitchen for a drink. As I walked through the corridor, my attention was caught by a cockroach scuttling across the floor. Intrigued, I embarked on a mission to catch it and release it outside from our balcony. However, my pursuit proved futile when the insect disappeared behind the sofa. Frustrated, I gave up and decided to let it be. As I returned to the corridor, an eerie sound reached my ears. A twisting doorknob. Living with 2 roommates, I was accustomed to the familiar sound of our apartment door being unlocked. But this was different. It was just the creaking of the metal doorknob being pressed. Initially, I assumed the noise originated from my room. Since we often left our balcony windows open at night to cool down the apartment, there was usually a draft that caused doors to open and close on their own. I reasoned that the metallic sound might have been the hinges of my room's door. Yet, upon returning to the corridor, I realized the sound was distinctively coming from the main apartment door. I watched in astonishment as the doorknob slowly pressed down and then released, repeating the motion several times. Soft, slow pressure followed by release. Moments of silence. Soft, slow pressure followed by release again and again. It became evident to me that someone was outside the door, but their identity remained a mystery. Although I briefly considered the possibility of one of my roommates being locked out, they all had their own keys and would have been able to unlock the door. Moreover, I vividly remembered seeing them return home much earlier that evening. If one of them had somehow found themselves outside without a key, wouldn't they have called out to me for assistance? Why was there complete silence? My next assumption was that it could be a burglar, attempting to enter apartments by checking if any doors had been carelessly left unlocked. However, this theory soon seemed unlikely. I firmly grasped the doorknob to prevent the person on the other side from pressing it, and sternly uttered, "What the fuck? What the hell are you doing?" Regrettably, my intended aggression came out uneven and feeble. Still, there was no response. It was clear that they had heard me. Our walls were not soundproof, allowing sound to travel easily in and out of the apartment. They must have been fully aware of my presence, just as I knew they were on the other side. Yet, there was nothing. No words, no signs of panic or escape. After a brief silence, they attempted to turn the doorknob once again. In a desperate attempt to communicate non-verbally, I pounded on the door, thinking that maybe the person did not understand English. That's when the most terrifying moment occurred. I don't know if it was real or a figment of my imagination, but I swear I heard a soft tapping on the door, a quiet and rapid sound, like someone drumming their fingers. It was distinct from my forceful pounding, which produced 2 solid thuds. I immediately suspected that their tapping was some sort of response to my knocking. In retrospect, it's possible that my panic influenced my perception, but I genuinely believe I heard something of the sort. For a moment, I contemplated taking matters into my own hands. I rushed to my room, retrieved my keys, grabbed a large kitchen knife, and prepared to unlock the door. However, I found myself unable to move due to overwhelming fear. I was paralyzed, consumed by a strong sense that this was precisely what the person outside wanted. It seemed as though their plan had been to taunt me with the doorknob and tapping, waiting for the moment when my anger would override my fear, compelling me to unlock the door and step outside. Refusing to succumb to their twisted game, I remained behind the door, clutching the knife tightly. I mustered the strength to speak, though my voice trembled. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but fuck off. Stop trying to open our door and fuck off. If you continue, I'll call the police. If you persist in pressing down on the doorknob, I'll call the police." Once again, my words came out weaker and shakier than intended. Yet there was no response from the other side, just an unsettling silence. After a brief pause, the doorknob was pressed again, Realizing that immediate action was necessary, I dialed 911 and provided them with my address, explaining the unsettling situation to the dispatcher. As I spoke, the doorknob remained motionless, devoid of any sound. After hanging up the phone, I witnessed the doorknob being pressed down one final time before falling into silence. The last notable occurrence was the faint click of the main door of the apartment building shutting. It dawned on me that the intruder must have fled downstairs and made their escape. In a rush of adrenaline, I hurried out onto the balcony, hoping to catch a glimpse of them. However, my efforts proved futile as I saw no trace. Either they had swiftly vanished or cleverly kept close to the adjacent wall, obscured from my view by the balconies of the floor below. Shortly thereafter, the police arrived, and I awkwardly recounted the entire ordeal to them. They inquired whether it could have been a drunken individual or someone attempting to enter their own apartment, but such explanations were clearly unfounded. A drunk person would have made more noise and moved around, while someone attempting to enter their own apartment would have used a key instead of pressing the doorknob deliberately and softly. The police diligently searched each floor of the building, but found no sign of the intruder, confirming my earlier suspicion that they had departed. I felt a sense of guilt for inconveniencing the officers, who appeared somewhat indifferent to the situation. I apologized several times for summoning them in the late hours of the night over what seemed like a trivial matter. The whole experience felt surreal, and explaining it only amplified the absurdity. At one point, I even entertained the notion that perhaps it had all been a figment of my imagination, a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. But deep down, I was certain that I had seen the doorknob move, and had felt the pressure as I held it. I recalled hearing faint rustling sounds, perhaps the shuffle of feet or the rustling of clothing, another piece of evidence that there had indeed been someone on the other side. I even thought I heard them attempting the doorknob of our neighbor's apartment across the hall. In the end, I was left bewildered, grappling for an explanation. If the intruder had been a burglar, they would have fled the moment they realized someone was awake and vigilant. Why would they continue trying the doorknob? One touch would have confirmed that it was locked. I considered the possibility that they were trying to pick the lock using a particular method that required them to softly press the doorknob. However, that made no sense if they were aware of my presence just a few feet away. My theory, although flawed, was that they were genuinely a burglar who had somehow managed to infiltrate the apartment complex. They went from door to door, silently testing each doorknob to find an unlocked entry point. However, upon reaching my door and sensing my presence, they devised a different plan. By repeatedly pressing the doorknob, they aimed to provoke me, hoping my frustration would override my caution, luring me outside where they could overpower me. Or worse, they remained silent, knowing that any attempt to threaten or intimidate me would only hasten my call to the authorities. Their strategy relied on the unsettling combination of silence and ambiguity to instill anxiety, pushing me to unlock the door in search of answers. When they heard me speaking to the dispatcher, their realization that the police would soon arrive prompted their hasty retreat from the building. That was the only explanation that seemed to make sense, although it was riddled with flaws. What would their plan be once they had me outside? Could they truly execute a swift and silent attack, eliminating me without arousing the attention of other tenants, and then proceed to ransack the apartment? The amount of effort, risk, and potential complications for a simple burglary seemed excessive. Moreover, I had roommates, an additional factor they might not have been aware of, but would undoubtedly pose a significant challenge for their nefarious intentions. As I grappled with these thoughts, I found myself at a loss. I wondered if anyone else had experienced something similar. Was it a prank? A meme? Or the result of an unconventional lock-picking technique? Or was it indeed the work of an unhinged individual who derived pleasure from tormenting others? The entire ordeal had left me shaken to the core. The image of someone standing on the other side of my door, persistently pressing the doorknob while disregarding my every action and word. lingered in my mind. It was a chilling reminder of the potential dangers that lurk in the shadows, even within the perceived safety of one's own home. Months passed, and the incident gradually faded into the realm of unsettling memories. I took extra precautions, reinforcing the security measures of our apartment and adopting a newfound vigilance. Still, the unanswered questions haunted me, a constant reminder that sometimes the true nature of a threat may forever remain shrouded in mystery. To this day, I cannot definitively explain what transpired that night. It remains an enigma, a fragment of my past forever etched with an unsettling sense of uncertainty. And while life has moved on, the experience serves as a poignant reminder that our perception of security can be shattered in an instant, leaving us forever changed.